everyone. This is my late, hey everyone, Douglas Blair Roberts here, the Super Beta 400. And of course, um, the brown skinned human come back at you with another video. And this right here is my late, out of date rant on the Sony Spider-Man universe based movies. That's The Amazing Spider-Man Part 1 and 2, Venom, and of course, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, that was the best of the Sony Spider-Man universe. I consider each of these films to be the worst cinematic universe of all time, and to be some of the worst comic book movies of all time, and Spider-Man and some of the worst movies of all time, especially The Amazing Spider-Man Part 1 and 2 and Venom. Like I said, Into the Spider-Verse was surprisingly the best of the four, but I thought that too was quote unquote disappointing. So with that being said, let's show these movies what I am made of. Alright, first we're gonna start off with the Amazing Spider-Man based movies. Like I've said in plenty of videos and rants, the Amazing Spider-Man Part 1 and 2 are two of the worst films of all time and are the worst live action comic book movies of all time. The only movies that beat these are is the Dragon Ball Z animated movie Resurrection F for Katsunov, whatever you want to call it. That is the worst. That is the worst. That is the quote unquote worst movie. That is the worst comic book movie of all time. But this is the worst live action comic book movie. The first movie with that depicts real people. In all of these movies, with the exception of Into the Spider-Verse, which I'm going to get to later in this video, um, all of those except for that one were terrible. And that one was just that one was just decent. I don't do decent or okay. Either you good or you suck. But I'm gonna get to that one later. But this film right here, everything terrible about the Hollywood blockbuster scene and movie scene, modern movie scene, was this film, were these films right here, and I considered it inexcusable considering the decade we're in. Back then, in the back then in decades like the 90s and 80s, everything was gonna suck. Only a couple of these movies were considered and were gonna be good. In the 2000s, the standard started to be upped a little, but the bar started to be set higher. That's the era where we were getting these movies for the first time. Finally, a Spider-Man movie. Finally, an X-Men movie. Then you have the 2010s, the age of the MCU, and what I consider the good movies era, which started in 2012 with the blockbuster smash hit, The Avengers. Um, and they just make an average 2005, 2008 style movie, which is what this was. In the updated, what's his name? Then the fact that they rebooted they rebooted a 10-year franchise, a successful 10-year franchise in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man series, with the last one just being 5 years before the Amazing Spider-Man 2012 release, and that of course was Spider-Man 3, and didn't see no failure. They didn't start making an average movie with um Average movie would cut it. Then they just did this. They just made this. Then the most offensive thing. They just made this film just to keep the rights. Instead of giving it back to Marvel, give it back. You were not gonna make. You were not gonna top Marvel and top the Sam Raimi trilogy. As soon as Sam Raimi was done, you were done. Give it back. Give it back. Now, what they like I said, what did they do? When they tried to start their own cinematic universe. This one, 2012 rips off Twilight and Batman Begins, and I was one of the first people to say that. Now everyone says that. It also borrows ideas from a horror movie. It was on Red Letters Media. I don't remember what it was, but a horror movie from the 70s. Their plot, the plot, and of course Batman '89 was spraying gas over the city. That was one of the first movies to feature that. So that's what this movie's a ripoff of. In the Twilight comparisons, I was one of the first to say that and got trolled and attacked by a bunch of fans. Now everybody who hates these movies says that, yeah, Andrew Garfield, he acted nothing like Peter in this film. He was Edward Cullen, and Gwen Stacy was Bella Swan. So yeah, the worst movie ever. And this movie is just as bad as the second one. On difference between this movie only has one to two boring plots. And the second plot, which is Peter's parents, have nothing to do with the with Peter and the lizard's plots, which are the two main plots of this movie right here. So yeah, people like to say, well, this movie wasn't as bad as it wasn't as bad as the second one. No, both of these were terrible. It's just this one only had one plot, one extremely boring and dumb plot with Spider-Man's Peter Parker sneaking into Oscorp, stealing someone's badge and sneaking into Oscorp and obtaining spider powers. Um, and Lizard and Kurt Connors who has the arm problem. And in order to make it go away, he keeps injecting himself. He keeps injecting himself, and his plan is to turn everyone into lizards. And this movie tries to be super serious and real, super serious and quote unquote realistic. Yet it has a lizard man. It has a lizard man, an electro man, and a rhino, and a rhinosaur in in the sequel. Yet it tries to be realistic. Then Oscorp is featured here, but the Osborns, the namesake characters, they're not. And this is a huge plot hole and a huge problem in the second movie. What's his name? Inaccurate to the comic books. Inaccurate to the comic books. I said this one last. This was one of the last ones because as much as I hate them for not following the comic books are irrelevant. A lot of the films I like don't follow their comic books or alter their comic books for the point of adaptation. But you gotta have something better than what was on this screen right here. And they did. This film only has three things in common with the comic books. Andrew Garfield resembles the ultimate version, even though this is supposed to be the Amazing Spider-Man universe, but okay. And 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 he goes from instead of having a Halloween costume like in the Sam Raimi version, and then upgrade and then eventually upgrading and moving on to the iconic comic book costume. No, he goes from a regular kid. He goes from a normal kid to Spider-Man to the Hollywood theater style comic book style of costume, which is one of the many things I hated about Spider-Man. Oh, and he has web shooters. He has web shooters, even though they're not developed by him like in the comic books. They're developed by Oscorp. So those are only three things. And the third one is the thing I hated the most with him. A normal kid. What does a normal kid get a costume that looks that good? That looks that good. This is like a Hollywood theater costume. Hollywood theater costume, and he quickly goes gets a custom made costume that looks that good. Where does a kid get a costume like that? I like how the Sam Raimi trilogy and Far From Home did it better. Where he started with where Far From Home he had in the beginning, but Tony Stark took it. I mean not Far From Home, but Homecoming took it away. Tony Stark took it away from him and made him earn it. He went for the cool. He had the cool hoodie look, the cool hoodie look. Then of course in Sam Raimi trilogy in the first one he had the Halloween wrestling based wrestling based costume, which is what a teenager high school student's costume would look like. Kid would not have a costume that looked that good. So that was that was one of the reasons problems I have with Spider-Man. I've always had with Spider-Man. Always had with Spider-Man. So yeah, but going back to what I was saying, those are only three things it has in common with the comic books. Everything else is wrong. People try to say, well, Gwen Stacy was his first love. I didn't even know this, but he dated Betty from the old Spider-Man, the 60s and 80s Spider-Man cartoons before he went out with Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy. And Gwen Stacy was not his lab assistant, and her character only existed here just to die and set up the next love interest. So they tried to make Gwen Stacy more important and more useful to the storyline, and they ended up making her even more useless, being inaccurate, wrong, and just downright terrible. Actress was good, but the character was not. This was an overpowered Mary Sue. Mary Sue, she was smart, good at everything, and was always helping Peter. She should have been the hero of the film. Then you got then you got the worst Flash Thompson ever. He's not a football player. He's a basketball player like in the cartoon, and he's just the most unintimidated. He's the worst and the lamest villain ever. Picking up a guy saying "eat your peas," and Peter Parker's not even the one being bullied. It's someone else. And the cheese-tastic basketball scene where Peter Parker not only jumps halfway across the please showing off, which he does a lot in this film, showing off, but he breaks the goalpost and there's no consequence for that. And people up there that still know he's Spider-Man, even though he's constantly showing off. He's constantly showing off, even putting his name, property of Peter Parker. Like I said, just a cocky show off. That's what Andrew Garfield was. He didn't capture Peter Parker. He didn't capture Peter Parker. And his jokes as Spider-Man were downright terrible, inappropriate, and were done at the wrong times. He was so lame. His jokes were so terrible that I know that the quips are part of Spider-Man. I wanted to go back to Tobey Maguire where he shuts the hell up, or wanted a villain to shut him the hell up because he was so lame, wasn't witty and cool like the cartoon Spider-Man in his jokes. So yeah, Garfield, the worst portrayal of a superhero is Andrew Garfield, man. And he was a cocky show off the entire film, so it's not like he'll become more responsible later. Now he was that the entire film series. Never grew up. Never grew up. The worst Spider-Man character, the worst Spider-Man actor ever, ever, ever. And I'm sick of people praising praising this actor. This film was terrible, and he was one of the main reasons. Every plot hole, every inconsistency, and everything inaccurate, and everything terrible about this movie. The terrible acting, where the characters repeat everything and have no chemistry with each other. Twilight-inspired acting. I'll forgive it all if Andrew Garfield wasn't the lead actor, because everyone else was good. It was just a bad script and a bad movie. Then you had the sequel, which the sequel, the movie ever, worst movie ever. This movie had about 5, 6 plots. None of them connected. None of them really go with each other. None of them go with each other. One of the many things I hate about this film was the way Rhino looked in this film. But you know what? I'm gonna leave that alone. Not only did I hate the way Rhino looked, the stupid Megazord when it's supposed to be an exoskeleton like RoboCop and Juggernaut, um, or not Juggernaut, but Iron Man. Not only was the ultimate Rhino, but um, he had no impact. He had no real impact on the film, and his whole appearance here was just to set up the Sinister Six. You can remove him from the film, and the film would not be any different. Not only that, you'd have had a much better movie if you were just focused on Electro and Harry Osborn. Harry Osborn, Harry Osborn, and Harry Osborn should have been Harry and Norman should have been in the first one. Should have been in the first one. They try to shove a Peter and Harry friendship down our throats. Yet we didn't hear anything or see Harry in the first film. Yet we saw his organization, Oscorp. 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 Then you have this stupid plot stolen from Star Trek. I mean, rehashed from Star Trek with Magic Blood. With Magic Blood um saving Harry's stupid unconfirmed and unexplained illness. Um um Then you got Harry killing Gwen Stacy. Oh yes, the iconic Gwen Stacy death. This has been done so wrong. I'm sick of talking about it. Wrong, wrong setting, wrong goblin, and just inconsistent, inconsistent with what was going on in the comics and in your own movie, and missing the point. Gwen Stacy pretty much caused her death, freeing Spider-Man from any guilt and any responsibility, missing the purpose of what Spider-Man was all about. So yeah. Then oh yeah, Gwen Stacy killing Electro. You know she's never even met Electro in the comic books. Then Electro, who could have been the best character in the film, the best, and um um Jamie Foxx, the MVP of actors in this movie. Jamie Foxx was the MVP of actors in this film, but like I said, the people they gave him nothing to work with. He hates because Spider-Man was more popular than him. Then he foolishly thought because he was on the screen for a couple of seconds, he thought he was quote unquote famous. So, psychopaths, thugs, criminals are seen on the screen all the time. Does that equal fame? Does that equal fame and respect? No. Like I said, it's a terrible villain. Electro had nothing to do in the comic books. Electro had nothing to do. Electro was never a sympathetic character. He was the other way around. When he got his powers, he decided he was gonna walk over everyone else and rob banks and do what the fuck he pleases. In both versions of the Amazing and the Ultimate, it was different. Look wise, he's based on his Ultimate version, but story wise, they didn't get neither one right, and they created one of the dumbest and one of the worst villains ever. Then right when the film gets good, the battle sequences at the end, they ended abruptly, so we can do the stupid Gwen Stacy Gwen Stacy death, which is a plot hole. Because Harry Harry and Electro fight together, which I expected to happen when I saw Rhino, Electro, and Harry advertised for him. I expected a big superhero, super villain 3-on-1 showdown. I didn't get that in this movie. I got all these different battles which don't connect in at three different parts in the film. The biggest sin with this film, focusing way too much on the Sinister Six garbage and films that are not going to be made now over your first film. These people had the audacity to mention Venom films and spin-offs and Sinister Six stuff when they can't even get Spider-Man, Gwen, and the regular characters right. This film destroyed every single character. Then you have Aunt May's, who she's another storyline. Her becoming a nurse that could have been cut out all together, and the film would not have been the same. Even the actress Sally Field hated this piece of garbage because it was garbage. I'm sick of people trying to say this was good. This was the worst movie ever. Yes, it was worse than Batman. Worse than Batman and Robin. Batman and Robin had a screenplay and they focused on their first movie first. But that's for another video. And so happy this failed. It didn't fail, but it didn't make the money it should. It failed to outgross the Sam Raimi version, and it failed to be the highest grossing film in 2014, despite the hype. Captain America and Guardians of the Galaxy, Flagman, a Birdman, and a Ninja Soldier looking guy beat your film. Uh, Talking Tree and Raccoon beat your um beat your movie. And then when you compare it to all the MCU films, the big budget MCU films now, and the Spider-Man films now, it's no comparison. Like I said, most pathetic film ever. And I hate this movie. And to believe Sony was gonna try another Spider-Man franchise without Marvel briefly before, so not Andrew Garfield, but Tom Holland. Tom Holland created a deal that works for both people. The Sony people can have their stupid universe. He can appear in their stupid universe, but still stay contracted to Marvel. So yeah, these movies were terrible. You can like these movies, but stop saying they were good. Stop praising them, and stop saying they're underrated. No, they failed. They deserve to fail. They're some of the worst films ever. They're some of the worst films ever. If you know Spider-Man, you knew anything about Spider-Man, you would hate these movies too, and you would have been nowhere near this film unless you're an open-minded guy who likes everything, or one of those fans who likes everything in the franchise, even the terrible stuff. Even the terrible stuff. I did that with the X-Men franchise. X-Men movie franchise. A lot of those were terrible, but because I'm a huge fan of X-Men, and those were at least okay superhero movies, I accepted them for what they were, despite how terrible they were. So yeah, Spider-Man. So yeah, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, worst film ever. Everything was bad. Everything was even worse. The acting was worse. They repeat everything. Terrible special effects. It's like the GameCube era. Terrible soundtrack. Had that For You song and what you call it. Dumb plots like the coins in the calculator and into the sewer stuff, and constantly reminding us that Peter Parker's parents died in a plane crash, which the parents subplot once again doesn't tie into anything in the film. It keeps reminding us what we already know. What we already know. Yeah, the worst movie ever. The problems with these movies are endless. Are endless. But yeah, this is the worst and most offensive movie of all time. And yes, offensive too. It's not only but the biggest sin was this film. This film this film had no faith in the source material so much that they tried to remind you of tragic events that happened in real life, such as 9/11. 9/11, during which caused film during the final battle with Electro. So yeah, worst film ever. Worst film ever. Then you have Into the Spider Verse, the first good Spider-Man movie. Into the Spider Verse. Now I hated this film, and I think it's terrible, just like what you call. But this one, it was more heart, it was more soul put in this one. And had it been an MCU film, I'm MCU biased. MCU biased. I would have enjoyed it. I would have enjoyed it much more. But this film had terrible animation, in my opinion. It had a dumb plot and was just boring, dull, and uninteresting compared to the Miles Morales comic books. And it's only popular because it's Miles Morales. It has a lot of the same problems as the Amazing Spider-Man films did, focusing way too much on setting up other films instead of your main story, focusing way too much on the stupid Spider-Verse, dumb plots. Kingpin, how does Kingpin get his hands on technology to travel to try to travel to other multiverses? Um where does he get the knowledge to develop something something quote unquote like that? Like that. If he was the villain Mysterio, I might the villain known as Mysterio or any other big time technology based villain, sci-fi fantasy technology based villain in Spider-Man, I might accept it. But Kingpin, a regular mobster, getting getting obtaining technology to travel to other multiverses, yeah, I'm not accepting that. Not accepting that, and it was just dull. The comic books of Miles Morales were much more exciting. The Ultimate Spider-Man's camp appearance um episode of Miles Morales and their their Into the Spider-Verse storyline, was way better than this film's right here. So yeah, but this is the best one. But like I said, I don't do okay, and I'm MCU biased, so this film is terrible. This film is terrible too, but at least more went into this film. But I was completely disappointed and expected much more from this movie. Then you got the worst one of all time. Now this is my believe it or not, this film right here I'm about to talk about. This is my favorite one of the Spider-Man series because it features one of my all-time favorite characters in the Spider-Man mythos, and that is of course Venom. That is of course Venom Eddie Brock. But this film was terrible. The acting was atrocious. The acting was atrocious. The plot was rushed. Venom in the beginning. Venom in the beginning. Random. Venom in the beginning doesn't care about really much of anything. Much of anything. Then at the end he decides he's gonna be a hero and he can't let Riot destroy the city. Something like that. I don't remember what it was. The acting was terrible. No one gave a good performance. Eddie Brock's voice was absolutely Eddie Brock's accent, which is usually never a problem. Here, his British accent was a problem. This is usually never a problem, but it was here. He was boring and monotone. He was boring and monotone the entire film. Like he didn't want to be here. He didn't want to be here. And everyone was terrible except for the special effect creatures themselves. That was Venom, whoever was doing his voice, and the character of Riot. Then after this terrible film's over, they try to tease us with the appearance of Carnage. Then at first, before this film was released, they used the MCU. They used the idea that this film could appear in an MCU movie in order to sell, in order to get you into the theater. Then last minute said no, this is into its own universe, and that's when I avoided it. Then of course the last unoffensive thing, the last offensive thing they did was they tried to connect this film to a terrible film to the supposedly good film, and that was Into the Spider Verse. I like this film, but I agree with everyone who hated this film, and I only like it because it's a Venom based movie. This is even worse than the Amazing Spider-Man films, even though I like this one much better than I like the Amazing Spider-Man based movies movies um movies. But yeah, make no mistake about it. This film was terrible and one of the worst movies, one of the worst comic book movies I've ever seen, man. I only like it because it's Venom. And while Tom Hardy does suck in this movie, I do like him in the role as Venom. But yeah, this movie was terrible. This movie was terrible, and it didn't deserve to make the much money. It didn't deserve to make the money it made. So yeah, this has been my rants on the Sony Spider-Man film. This was my rant on the films. There's gonna be another one based upon. There's gonna be another rant based upon the fans of these the fan base who make these movies possible, who make these terrible movies possible. Well, I'm done. You want to hear the rest of the music and my button mashing from my Xbox One? Turn the video off right now.